Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. Today, I've invited Siobhan McTee to the show. She's a law enforcement officer who also coaches clients and groups on the neurophysiology of their bodies and teaches them how to self-regulate during times of stress and trauma. She knows the challenges of mental health in our profession and provides hope and tools to mitigate stressors so we can achieve the best versions of ourselves. If you find value in today's episode, don't hesitate to share it with a colleague or a friend. And be sure to listen to our past and future episodes for more insights. I just wanted to thank you for being here this afternoon and just being willing to really kind of share your story as to, the things that you've experienced over the course of your career in law enforcement. And I think it's so important to be able to do that because there's a lot of folks that go through a lot of the same things, and it's good for them to know that, that they're not alone in that. And there's ways that that we have now in law enforcement to help us navigate our way through that. And I'm so grateful that there are now folks that are out there that are really willing to talk about that because, being in law enforcement like we have been for at least for me, for over 3 decades, there's been a time where this is kind of taboo. You just kind of don't talk about some of the things that you experience as a law enforcement officer when it comes from your personal struggles, right? We're built to be tough and we can handle anything. And anytime that I think that we can be vulnerable with each other in our community, I think it's a really good way of coming around those, because we all go through it, coming around those and letting them know that it's okay. And really kind of goes to help with lowering that stigma. I think we still have a long way to go. But the more I think we talk about it, the less of a barrier and an obstacle that is. So thank you for being here, and just looking forward to hearing what's on your heart today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And it is always an honor to be able to be put in a position where I can share my story. So thank you for bringing me here today
You bet.
and providing that opportunity to me. Well, I guess but I can start at the beginning. So I'm the oldest of 8 children. I grew up in a strong Irish Catholic family. My mom stayed home with us, and my father worked for the FBI. Specifically, he worked kidnappings and bank robberies in Florida while I was growing up, and he was really my my hero, my idol. He was everything that I wanted to be, and so, as a young girl, I started reading his literature. Like, I'd read books by John Douglas or Robert Ressler about serial killers and how to profile and all these things. I had strong intentions of going into the FBI and becoming a profiler and finding serial killers. That was kind of always the path for me. Again, like from a young girl, I kind of knew that was the direction I was headed. My grandpa also worked for the CIA, so come from a law enforcement background for sure. And so as I aged, I started to kind of pick up and follow in my father's footsteps. So I ended up going to CSU and doing my internship with a local law enforcement agency in northern Colorado. I worked with their investigations team, and up until that point in my life, I was pretty dead set on becoming an FBI agent. But I went out with their SWAT team, this county SWAT team, to go serve a warrant on a meth house in a dodgy side of town, in the north area of the city that I worked in, or lived in rather. And got to see all the guys kind of tacked out and running towards this trailer to serve this warrant. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I was probably 20 years old sitting in the passenger seat on my little ride along. I'm like, I don't want to ride a desk. Like, I don't want to work for the FBI. I want to do this. Like, this is cool. So in that moment, I decided to shift gears and pursue a career in local law enforcement.
Mm.
Mhm. So I ended up graduating from CSU, and I worked at the jail as a very young woman. I was maybe 21, 22 years old, which was an interesting experience to be a young lady of that age range in control of a pod of 150 inmates. I learned a lot of lessons about life and how to talk to people and assert myself, the gift of gab, if you will.
Yeah.
And spent about a year and a half there, and then I got hired on with the city that I was living in at the time. So um, when I got hired on by this city, it was like all of my dreams came true. Uh, Ever since I was a little girl, I had crafted this idea of myself and what my path was, where I was going to to be in law enforcement. And when I got issued my badge and my gun, I was just over the moon and thought that like this superhero cape came with it, and I was going to get all the bad guys and kick in all the doors, and I was your girl. If you needed something, you just call me. Like, I'm gonna save the day. And it was fun. Like, I remember I was supposed to get off at 4 o'clock in the morning. I worked power shift for a while, which was 6 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. And our mids cars got off at 7:30. And I would routinely go EOS on my computer at 4 and still hang out until 7:30 because I didn't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
If there was a hot
Yeah.
call, I was still going to go. So, best job ever. And um, I felt a strong sense of identity in the profession. So, since I was a kid, I knew it was for me and I was for it. And my sense of identity and self was tethered to the job, and the job was tethered to me. It was kind of very tangled. Um, so in July of 2005, I'd been a cop for maybe a year. I got dispatched to a structure fire that happened on the west side of town. My partner and I were sitting car to car. We were just talking about whatever cops talk about in the middle of the night. And the dispatch call came out of a structure fire about a mile and a half or so just south of where we were sitting. And it was a mother and a child who were trapped in a second story apartment building. And I remember looking out my driver's side door towards the direction of the fire and just seeing these massive flames licking the atmosphere. My partner and I went code 3 to the fire, and we were the first on scene. And dispatch was airing updates, like the mom's screaming for us to come help. And then, there's a pause, and we can hear the mom breathing, and then nothing. And then the line goes dead. And so we ran up to this building, and I remember standing close enough to the apartment where I could feel the heat of the fire on my skin and staring up at this window. And I had my Maglite in my right hand, and I was like, I should throw this at the window and break it, and maybe that'll give them air. And I understand now, like, that's not how fire works and all of that. But I was just in this state of scrambling to figure out, how can I help? What can I do? And there's this surreal moment where I kind of zoom out of my body, and I can see myself standing there just kind of looking up at this window and realizing that there was nothing that I could do. Like, I was simply a human being standing there, incapable of affecting change. So, all these thoughts and ideas of how somehow when I got issued my badge and gun, that I was a superhero, that could do anything and kind of shattered. And I became confronted with the fact of my humanity and my limitations that exist within that. I wasn't any different than anybody else just because I was a cop, and that theme kind of played uh, into my career and life many times.
Mm.
So with that, that call, the mother and the child ultimately died in the fire, and a part of me kind of shattered as well. Um, I still pushed forward though, because that's what we do in law enforcement. And I had a lot of well meaning partners who asked me if I was okay and asked me if I was still able to do the job. And to me, what I heard was, are you still able to maintain your identity? This was something, ever since I was a child that I knew was for me and I was for it. And so the idea that somehow my partners would think that I would be incapable of doing it because of this traumatic call kind of shifted the way I thought about emoting, about, um, I don't know, making myself vulnerable about my struggle. So I kind of stuffed it all down and um, just kept forging forward. So I engaged in this behavior I later learned was called mastery, where I went to all the fire calls that I could, not only to prove to my partners that I was capable of handling that call and remaining calm, but also to prove to myself that I could still do it, like I could still be successful at this. Nothing was going to stop me. I suffered from classic symptoms of PTSD. I had nightmares fairly regularly in the beginning, where this mother and child would meet me in my dreams, screaming at me for not saving them. And they kind of stretched out over time. So they were very frequent and then would become more like quarterly to semi annually to on the anniversary. Or, now they've mostly gone, but if I find myself in a state where I feel helpless, sometimes they'll flare back up. Um, but I continued to work hard as a police officer and worked hard to show everyone that I was competent and capable of still doing the job, and thereby maintaining my identity as a cop. Uh, and I ended up becoming a crimes against persons detective a few years later. I wasn't able to save that child in the fire, but I was going to save all the rest of the babies in my community. Just ask me. So um, I, I think what's relevant about at least this part of my history is that if you were to look at me as a bystander or even as a partner, a close partner that I worked with on the street, you would never know that I was going through anything. Like I was very buttoned up. I was very put together professionally. I brought my A game every day. There was nothing really lacking in performance when it came to work. But if you were to come home with me, you would see where the fallout of the stuff I hadn't been addressing was kind of playing out. Like I wasn't engaging with my family. The analogy I like to use is that it was like I was watching a movie of my family, but I wasn't playing a part in the movie. I was very detached from everything that was going on at home. Um, I would engage in things like mindless scrolling or taking a bath, isolating myself from things, uh, not engaging with my life outside of work. And at work, I would just continue to push and push and push and take on more and more and more. And I don't think that is novel for our type of career. I think, most of us want to show how broad our shoulders are and how much we can take and withstand. But as what happened with a fire um, taught me, like, we eventually all come face to face with our humanity. And whether we like it or not, we are all subject to playing by the rules of being human. And so that that definitely came uh, top of mind, or I was confronted face to face with my own humanity again later in my career. I hadn't addressed it from the fire, but I ended up having to face it as a detective. So ultimately, that day of reckoning, if you will, for me came in February of 2019. I had been a detective for probably 9, 10 years at the time. And I was issued a case or assigned a case where it was a mother who had lost her child in a shooting. Now, her child was older, he was in his 20s, and he and another 20-year-old were in a room together, and they were drinking and messing around with guns, and one of the guns went off. And her son was shot and killed as a result of the gun being fired. So our property guys were on call that night, and they went out and secured the scene, worked the investigation, and came to the conclusion that the gunshot wound was self-inflicted and accidental. And mom was very unhappy with the resolution they had come to. And I, as a crimes against persons detective, was tasked with working suspicious deaths and homicides. So I had more of a skill set, if you will, in these types of investigations. And because of mom's, I guess, anger about how the initial investigation was worked, she asked for it to be reopened, and the case was assigned to me. So I reinvestigated the case. There were things we could have done better. There were things that we missed. But ultimately, what that case represented to me was the mother who had met me in my dreams or nightmares so many years before from the fire became personified in front of me. And this mother from this case, I was at the receiving end of all of her outrage towards the police department. So I like to say that at the beginning of our law enforcement career, we're issued this suitcase. And the suitcase is great. It's got good wheels, the zipper's great, and everything works. And then over time, you start to put garments in the suitcase and put things in the suitcase, and you start working the zipper and working the zipper and working the zipper. And then eventually, and it's never at the right time, you're running late to a flight, you've got your suitcase, you're running across the terminal, and then the suitcase inevitably bursts open. And all of the stuff that you had crammed in there comes out, and you have to deal with it. So that's kind of what happened with me for this particular death investigation. All the things that I had packed away and not wanted to take a look at, I came face to face with. And so I was, at that point in my career, formally diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And I remember like these, I don't know, I guess they would be called intrusive thoughts of like, I didn't want to go to work. Like, I didn't want to be here anymore. There was this thread of thought of just those words. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. And I remember driving to work and being like, God, I wish I could get T-boned by a car right now. I need a break. Like I don't want to be here. So I petitioned my city. I asked them if I could take a year off and take a leave of absence. And they were great. Like, this agency is truly my home. I grew up there, and it's my family. So, and they always will be. So they were wonderful. They were like, yeah, take the time you need. And, we're here when you're ready to come back. So I took the year off, and I started researching all things wellness. I wanted to figure out how to heal. How do I get better? How do I take control over my mental health? Uh, and with that research, I mean, I was reading all the books. I was reading or going to all of the online classes that I could, getting all of the certifications that I could. to figure out how to get well. And I was working my mental health with the same veracity that I used to work my cases with. Like, but this was probably the most important case that I ever worked in my life. And it was important that I resolved it and came to a successful outcome for my children. So, with that research, I came to the conclusion that there's really five things that we should all be practicing on a day-to-day basis, and I call them now my five pillars of well-being when I present on the topic. But they're all pretty simple, and they are gratitude, diet, movement, connection, and breath work. And what was important to me about these concepts wasn't just the idea of, oh, I should just do them because some PhD said I should. It was, what is the evidence that they work? What is it doing to my nervous system? Where's the science? Where's your probable cause, if you will? Like, prove this to me beyond a reasonable doubt why I should be doing this. So, the scientific research and backing of these particular pillars is profound and undeniable. So, through the practicing of those five things, my world started to shift. And I was very disciplined about how I approached them and how uh, the routine I developed around practicing them every day. So I went from a place where my world was very dark and I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, to a place where my world started to have color again. Um, and I became very passionate about sharing these five pillars with my brothers and sisters in law enforcement in order to help them to learn to develop resilience and change the way their nervous system is responding to the daily doses of trauma that we get throughout the course of our career. And so now I'm back in law enforcement and I love it. I'm a huge proponent and advocate for wellness for police officers. And I'm hopeful with the sharing of my story and these tools that I can help other officers not fall into the same pitfalls that I did, and also to become more self aware of when they're struggling and what it can look like. So, the presentations that I give, I partner with a combat veteran who can speak to, there's so much crossover between the veteran community and law enforcement. So he can speak to that population in a way that I can't. But um, we go and give trainings about our stories and our stories of overcoming and the effects of trauma on the nervous system and the brain, and then what these five pillars do to help regulate your body so that you can become a better uh, officer and steward to your community, and also a better member of your family.
When you came to those five, was that something that had already been out there, or were those the five that resonated specifically with you?
Those were the five that resonated specifically with me. There's a ton of research on all five of them, and I wouldn't ever say that they're like, they weren't necessarily, none of it was like my idea. Like, practicing gratitude has been around forever, and breath work too, pranayama, and I mean, box breathing and whatnot. I think it was more that as I was doing the research, that those were the ones that I saw as tangible things that I could do every day
Hmm.
to start changing the way that I was showing up for myself and for my family.
So, if you could just, like, a brief example of what each one of those would look like on a daily or a weekly, or how do you practice that?
Yeah. So, gratitude is probably my favorite pillar. And what gratitude does, just that the evidential backing of this particular pillar, is it helps produce a chemical in your body called oxytocin. Oxytocin helps to regulate your nervous system. So when you're flared up, you lose parts or faculties of your brain. So you lose access to what's called your prefrontal cortex, which is where all of the discretionary parts of your brain are, your ability to experience joy and connection. So when you're stressed, you don't get to feel connected. You don't get to feel joy. Well, what oxytocin does is it helps to downshift your nervous system so you can access that part of your brain. Um, just for people who nerd out, there, it's called the polyvagal theory, and I forget who wrote this book, but it's a fantastic book. It's pretty dry on audiobooks. So don't do that. Maybe read it. But anyways, tons of research around that particular topic. So for practicing gratitude, what it looks like for me is when I find myself stressed, it can be as simple as finding something specific and intentional that I'm grateful for. So the example that I like to use is my 13-year-old son's hugs. My son gives the best hugs ever. And when he hugs me, he puts his head on my shoulder and he wraps his arms around my waist. And in that moment, the rest of the world kind of fades away. And I feel loved and accepted for exactly who I am and where I am in my life. So that to me evokes oxytocin, which helps to downshift my nervous system and keep me regulated. It's simple and I can practice it anywhere, and nobody even has to know that I'm doing it. So just a couple moments a day doing that. There's a lot of research around journaling right now and the benefits of journaling. You can couple the benefits of journaling with gratitude. The nice thing about journaling is it helps you provide language to emotion and to an event, which activates your prefrontal cortex. That need for language and sequencing exists in that discretionary part of your brain. So when you couple your prefrontal cortex with gratitude, you're almost getting a double win. So taking 5 minutes to write down what you're grateful for on any given day can really do wonders for your nervous system and your resilience in general. The second pillar is diet. And, we in America, our diet is called the standard American diet. It's the SAD diet, and it's appropriately termed. So, about, I think, over half of our food that we consume is highly processed, meaning we are eating textured chemicals. Now, your brain is the number one consumer of micronutrients in your body. So when you think about it, if you're feeding your brain textured chemicals, you're likely not going to get what you want to out of it. So what the research around diet shows is that the Mediterranean diet has been very successful in the treatment of people who have moderate to severe depression. And the reason for it is because it's high in micronutrients. The Mediterranean diet is a pretty simple diet. And like, I guess the simplest way to explain it is that it's food that doesn't require a label to identify. So, chicken is chicken if you're buying the right kind, right? Or, a pepper is a pepper. And so it doesn't require a long list of ingredients. It's simple. So eating simple foods, simple whole foods, really does help the way that your brain can process information and gets you more out of it. Limiting inflammatory foods and beverages like alcohol also gets the best out of your brain. So doing simple things like eating a vegetable with every meal or a piece of fruit with every meal can start to help you cultivate the habit of cleaning up your diet, reaching for something that is easily identifiable rather than, a Big Mac. Who knows what's in there? So that kind of thing. The next pillar is movement. And so when you are going through a stressful situation, your body is flooded with 23 different chemicals. We're familiar with the big names like adrenaline and noradrenaline, cortisol, but think about that. Like 23 chemicals flood your system to prepare you to move. So you're either going to fight and expend energy or run and expend energy. So with that, what exercise does or movement does is it helps you to metabolize those chemicals in a static environment to get your prefrontal cortex back online so you can kind of see the big picture. And when you reflect on this, like even introspectively, think about a time where you struggled and you went for a walk, and how did you feel after the walk? You probably felt a little better, probably could see the bigger picture and how this problem maybe relates to the big picture. And suddenly the problem isn't so big anymore. It becomes smaller and more manageable. And that's because you're looking at it through a different lens with that prefrontal cortex back online. So for movement, the key is to start small and to build off of it. There's been a ton of research on behavior change by legends such as BJ Fogg and James Clear. And both of those kind of iconic names in the habit forming community agree that you want to set small, attainable goals, and then anything beyond that becomes extra credit. So, for exercise, if you want to start developing a program, maybe your goal for a week is to just walk to the mailbox. You're going to walk to the mailbox, check the mail every day for a week. And anything that you choose to do beyond that is extra credit. That keeps that dopamine hit coming. You celebrate that small win, so you come back for it. Oftentimes we set these goals that are not attainable, and then we feel very defeated because we don't reach it. And then that we don't want to go back for more because we don't want to fail again. So making them small enough to achieve is kind of a critical part in habit forming. The next pillar is connection. And I think connection is a hard one for cops because we feel like we don't want to be a burden. We don't want to put our problems at our spouse's feet or anybody else's for that matter. And the idea of being vulnerable is very scary for us. But when you think about the times where you were at the receiving end of somebody's vulnerability, where a partner reached out to you and how you felt about it, my guess is that you feel competent, you feel capable, you feel trusted, you feel like you're relevant and you can help. And so maybe when we reach out, when we're struggling, we're giving someone else the opportunity to feel those things. Maybe we're giving them a gift. We're not a burden at all. It's just an exchange of gifting that vulnerability to somebody else who may need to feel needed as well. So for connection, I think, you have to find your circle. You have to find the person that you can lean on that won't judge you. And that requires courage. You can't just sit back and keep all of the stuff to yourself. Like you have to test the waters and have that discussion and see how it lands. And I can tell you that typically, as most things go, that our anxiety around sharing is far worse in our heads than it is when we actually do it. We have this idea of how we're going to be received in 99.99999% of the time. It's just so inaccurate. We're embraced for having the strength to come forward and say, hey, I need help. And so lastly, the last pillar is breath work. And breath work is a really amazing tool for regulating the nervous system. How breath works is when you breathe in, you activate your sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is all about action. It's all about getting yourself through a problem. Your exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system. Your parasympathetic nervous system is all about rest and digest. Now, when you're using breath correctly, you have access to both your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system at the same time. So the perfect breath There's a book by James Nestor. It's called Breath. It's amazing. Definitely recommend it. But through his research, he said the perfect breath is around 5.5 breaths a minute. It's not a lot of breath.
Hmm.
Most of us are breathing at a rate of around 30 breaths a minute. We are over breathing. And what the science is showing is that the way that we're breathing can be, uh, I don't know, it can predict, us, our scientists can predict when a panic attack will happen by studying the breaths leading up to it. And that 20 minutes or so before a panic attack happens is usually predicated with these short, choppy inhales that start to activate your sympathetic nervous system and prepare you to handle a threat. Your body, your system believes it's under attack, which leads to that panic attack. So we can interrupt that by regulating our breath. It's the only part of your autonomic nervous system that you actually have control over. But through controlling breath, you can control everything else. You can control your blood pressure. You can control your heart rate. You can control your brain through regulating breath. So most of us don't have a problem with the inhale. The problem is the exhale. So focusing on your exhale and really emptying out your lungs will help bring that parasympathetic nervous system online, and in turn, bringing your prefrontal cortex back online so that you can have more discretionary power to deal with whatever's in front of you.
Hmm.
So breath work is simple to practice. Again, it's one of those tools that you can do anywhere. But what I recommend is if you're just getting into a breathwork practice, to build it into a habit that you already have. So you know it's likely that you're probably going to stop at a stoplight at some point during the day. So use that prompt as your cue to practice breath work. Maybe practice a box breath. Maybe practice exhaling out all of your air through humming, through counting until you can't count anymore, but really emptying out your lungs. See how that feels. Be introspective. The law enforcement career has a focus on the external world, our external threats. We fail to look at what's going on inside until the situation becomes critical. So, all of these tools help you to start developing that muscle of being introspective and learning about yourself and what negative things might be happening within you so that you can address them. The external world is about neurospection, I think is what it's called. And then the internal world is about introspection. We need both in order to survive and thrive. So, yeah, I started practicing those tools, and with that daily practice, it's like this tremendous shift happened. And I got frustrated, frankly, that I didn't know more about it at the start of my career. I think we do a lot of work, and rightfully so, around those external threats, DT, firearms, all of these uh, issues that we may encounter throughout our career. There's also a good chance that we're going to experience something that causes us trauma. And I think that there needs to be more push to prepare officers for that, because we all, when we get our badge and gun, somehow think that we're inoculated to the world's harshness, and we're not. And so just educating new officers on what they can do to set themselves up for success, I think needs to become a part of post academy's curriculum, and of department curriculums as well, in service trainings and whatnot. It needs to be pushed.
Do you find other programs like the one that you do, or are they out there? Because I've not really heard or seen of those. Are you seeing this taught throughout the country?
Seeing more of it being taught throughout the country, like, it's been an interesting ride. When I was first going through my stuff, I was very unaware of anything out there. But as I have had the opportunity to go and speak at conferences and give these trainings, I'm learning that there is a group of people who are just as passionate as I am about spreading the narrative and shifting the culture and changing things moving forward. And I think that the law enforcement culture itself is beginning to understand how important this work is. I also would say a battle that we're facing is that most agencies believe that whatever they have in house is sufficient.
Mm.
They think that they can solve the problem on their own. And I would argue that is not the case, that you should seek knowledge outside of the boundaries of your walls. And if you limit yourself to what's in house, you are shutting down a lot of research and experience and passion and knowledge for fear of perhaps shining a light on a deficiency within your agency. So it's not a time for ego. It's a time to embrace whatever tools are out there and really uh, settle into the fact that it's okay to not know everything. None of us know everything, but together we all know a lot. So pool your resources and seek out programs that have been well received and do it for your people. Because if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting the same results.
You're back in law enforcement now, um, and obviously it's because of the work that you did, um, in 2019 and in 2020. Is there from that? Is there things that you can actually describe, um, that that you now know that you're going to be, that you're going to be able to have a full career in law enforcement, that it's going to be a successful career in law enforcement, and that you're setting yourself up for success even into retirement, and being able to live a full happy life.
Yes. So this second go around, uh, it's interesting because I feel like I can see more clearly. I see more clearly the long game. I see my role in the long game. And what was a priority for me maybe before uh, isn't anymore. My priorities have shifted. So when I first began my law enforcement career, it was important to me to be the best for everyone in my community. And how I thought I would achieve that goal was through working the hardest, through taking on more and more and more. Now, the second time around, I'm not saying that my goals are different. I still want to be the best, but I've realized that the path to getting there isn't taking on more and more. It's taking care of myself and my family so that I can be open to take care of my community and to be a good steward and to, um, I don't know, like the road is different to get there. I think as new officers, oftentimes we get caught up again in ego and how do I make myself look great, or how do I look great to other people, and stats and this and that and the other. But with the gift of time and maturity, it's not about stats. It's not about numbers. Perhaps it is for some agencies, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about being good stewards to the community and giving them a quality of work product that's not going to cripple you or damage your family. Like having whole officers who are grounded and mentally sound to give communities the service they need, that's the goal. Because then you're going to get the best work product out of the officer, not do more with less, do more with less, take on more, take on more. and this kind of like endless hunger that exists in some officers to prove their worthiness in their department, it has to shift. Like, we have to start taking care of ourselves and learning like that we require time too. We are human, and that's okay. And once we can address the issues of being human, we can show up differently and do better work for the communities that we serve. And that's excellent police work.
What is that direct correlation between kind of that comment or that phrase that you said at the very beginning, where your identity is your role at a police department or at a sheriff's office? It's basically your identity is in the job that you perform.
Yes. So I think that that is a huge part of resilience, is untethering your identity from that role. So most of us, whether we're in law enforcement or not, tend to, if I asked you about yourself, you would probably talk about your profession, that you're a father, a grandfather, or um, you were in politics. Like, it's all of these wonderful roles that you play throughout your life, but that's not who you are. Who you are is deeper than that. So for me, when I was new into my police career, if you were to ask me who I would tell you that I was a detective, a police officer, a mother, and a wife. And I would say that that was probably the order of importance of my roles, like it or not, for where I was at the time. So the problem with those roles is that they are all transient, every single one of them. I'm not a detective anymore. It's gone. I'm not well, I wasn't a police officer for a period of time, so that could be removed. It could be removed from anyone if they have a bad call or whatever the case may be, injure themselves. Mother, God forbid, something horrible could happen and that be taken away from me. And wife, I'm not a wife anymore. So there are transient roles that we put all of our meaning of self into. So with the gift of time and reflection, I've realized that I am so much more than the roles that I play in life. I'm compassionate, I'm brave, I'm kind, I am adventurous. I want to change the world and I want to serve others. Those are things about me, characteristics about me that nobody can take away from me. Those are mine. That is my identity. So, untethering yourself from the roles and learning what you are underneath the roles is a critical component to successfully navigating this career. Because, like it or not, whether it's on our timeline or someone else's, the job ends and you're left with yourself. So you have to figure out what you are.
Kind of that direct correlation to resiliency is not tethered to the roles, but it's tethered to your personal identity, your personal character,
Yes.
because that's the thing that helps you become resilient as you walk through it.
Yeah. Once again, that like concept of introspection, right? Like, what are you beneath it? Spend some time reflecting on that. And it's a hard question to answer, especially when you've allowed external things to define you for the entirety of your life. Taking a pause and being like, what am I without all this stuff? What do I bring to the table? Just me.
Yeah, and I think so many times that I think that we tie that role in, work so hard in that role to become successful in that role, that starts to become our identity, because we want to perform at a high level. We want to be well respected within our organization, within our community, um, because we want to be able to serve our community well. But when we take ourself and a lot of our own characteristics, or we're not taking care of ourselves, it really hinders our ability to be the best for the community that we say that we want to serve.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have a limited amount of bandwidth that you have throughout the course of your day. And when you think of your energy as currency and how you're spending it, if you're maxed out all the time, you're not going to have the bandwidth to deal with problems. So if you're constantly stressing yourself to achieve more and more and more, then the bandwidth shrinks, and then maybe you become more irritable. Maybe you become more prone to use of force issues. You see these officers, we all fall into the same traps because, again, we're all playing by the rules of being human. That, they're your top performers, but then something happens,
Mm.
and they're in the IA office more and more frequently. They're losing their bandwidth. They don't have the energetic currency to deal with the problems anymore. And it's because they're not taking time for themselves.
Mm.
They're constantly chasing the rabbit of success, and they're never going to catch it because they're going about chasing it the wrong way.
Mm. Yeah. So if you were to a couple of different roles, if you're talking to that person who's first considering getting into law enforcement or is within their first couple of years, what is your advice? And then when you're talking to somebody that's been in it for a while, there's always, there's no better time to start something than now, right?
Yeah.
So what would you encourage them to do moving forward so that we start we start being more introspective as opposed to what it is that we're currently doing from I'm going to call it the old school way of doing business in law enforcement.
I think for the new officer, I would say that start developing your practice around resilience now. How resilience works is how anything works in life with regards to putting deposits in and taking withdrawals. I like to think of it as a bank account. So if you're going to start making resilience deposits, you're practicing gratitude, you're remembering what's going well. Like, we are in a profession that is preoccupied with what is not going well. We are getting called out to what's not going well consistently. It's imperative that we remember at the same time that things aren't going well in this particular isolated incident. There are things that are going well externally. There's parents that are birthing children that they've prayed for their whole lives, and children walking across the graduation stage, accepting a diploma, the first person in their family to achieve the goal.
Mm.
There's people who are confessing their love for one another and meaning it. There's, there's so much good happening at the same time these negative pieces of the puzzle are happening. So we have to remember the big picture. But as a new officer, remembering that you're going to be exposed to 1% of the population. It's not all the population, it's a small piece. Um, and then practicing and putting those resilience deposits into the bank account so that when an incident occurs, you have something to withdraw from. You're not running in the red all the time. You've done the work and you bounce back faster. For the older officers who have seen so much and done so much in their career, it's never too late to change. And there's no lost cause.
Mm.
Um, you can begin to shift the way that your brain is working. You can begin to downshift your nervous system and be a part of this thing called humanity again and not isolate yourself. And these tools are simple. Like, your body, when you're in a state of stress, chronic stress, you have this thing called cytokines that starts to spike in your system. And what cytokines do is they cause the organism that is you to withdraw. You don't want to be around people anymore because people make you sick or they hurt you. Movement helps to decrease the level of cytokines in our body and encourages us to want to be involved in this thing called connection, that where all the good things of being human live. So practicing these things will help you to find joy again. And you are worth it. Like,
Mm.
you're allowed to be happy. And I think, especially the older officers who have gone through so much in their police career, whether it's political, administrative, or the types of calls they've handled, I think it's easy to get discouraged and be like, like, forget it. Like, I'm just going to die alone with my bottle of whiskey and cigar. You don't have to.
Mm.
You don't. Like, everybody's waiting to wrap you back up. So come back to the party.
Well, I really appreciate you being with us today and just kind of sharing what's on your heart. It very fascinating. I think that it really resonates with where we are in law enforcement, and I just love how it starts to put the focus where the focus really needs to be, and I know that law enforcement is changing for the good in that direction, and we need to continue to work down that path. And I thank you for all the work that you're doing to make sure that we're moving in that right direction, because that's truly where we need to go. You were talking a lot about all that we have to do, and I just keep thinking about we are a resource to the community, and we don't take care of, or we don't look at ourselves as that resource or that tool to be able to help the community. And we all know of tools that we use in our job and how important it is to take care of that, but we don't ever think about how important it is to take care of ourselves so that we can be used in the role that we play. And it's just, you just bring that to light so well, and just really appreciate our time. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so
It
much
was a
for
wonderful
having me.
conversation.
That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion. Until next time, stay safe and remember, you have the power to make a difference. Thank you for your commitment to law enforcement. We're honored to be a part of your journey to success. Let's elevate our call to service together.